Good afternoon. My name is Chris Coath. I work for NG Bailey. We are the UK's largest independent mechanical electrical contractor in the UK. And we are excited to be here today talking to you about net zero, and we'll be examining the challenges and the best practice that we're operating in the retrofit space. As I mentioned, my role is Energy and Asset Management Director for NG Bailey, and I'm working across our group to help ensure that our services and products are aligned to the net zero future. So we'll be talking you through that today, specifically focusing on some key areas. The first one is, what does our approach look like? So how do we engage with customers and take them on a journey through net zero? Then I'll talk through some of the challenges that we've seen over the course of the last 18 months and some of the lessons we've learnt. And then at the end, we'll move quickly on to some of the challenges we face beyond 2023 and how we think the market's going to change and some of the trends we'll observe. So starting off with a process, everybody loves a process, don't they? It's really important for us that we can have a clear, simple pathway for our customers to lead them through the pathway towards net zero. Of course, some customers have one building to focus on, others have an entire estate. But arguably, regardless of the size of that estate, the process remains the same. Starting on the left-hand side, every building now, of course, has an EPC rating, and with the new regulations, the minimum energy efficiency standards, there is an ambition for buildings to improve their EPC. And we think that's a great metric for our customers to use as a driver for change in net zero. The stage one for us is really data collection. We advise all of our customers in the first step of the process of moving to a decarbonised future that data collection really is key. What does that mean? It means really understanding the assets that you have in both your buildings and across your estates, not just M&E, but also from a fabric perspective. With that data, it really helps build a rich life cycle model. And of course, as we talk later on about business cases and justifying investment, having an understanding of the life cycle of your assets is really, really key. Lastly, of course, understanding your energy data, not just what metering you have, but where that data is and what is available to you is also really key. So that's step one. It sounds easy, but that's normally quite a challenge to kind of get your head around. We then move into the model for performance. So once we understand what's inside these buildings, what's across the estate, we believe it's really important to model out the different scenarios for each of those buildings. In our case, we tend to use a building simulation tool, and we work up a kind of a REBA stage 2 concept design for our customers. And that moves us quite quickly into stage 3, which is where we're kind of setting out the potential concepts for each individual building. We use the terms bronze, silver and gold, but that could be a 1, 2 or 3 or a good, better or great. But effectively what we're doing is using energy intensity as a metric to define how far we want to stretch the investment and the retrofit that we're planning. Bronze could be moving to about 120 or 100 kilowatt hours per meter squared energy intensity, which is good, and typically would involve electrification of natural gas boilers or oil burning boilers. Moving beyond that kind of bronze into your silver, the better option if you like, may include the electrification of the assets, but also introduction of other projects that will improve the building performance, such as lighting, building control system upgrades, potentially a couple of the fabric upgrade projects that can have the best possible payback. And then, of course, moving into gold, which is the best possible option, I guess, is really kind of aiming for the lowest possible energy intensity. So heading for that kind of golden area of 50 to 55 kilowatt hours per meter squared per annum. Of course, as you can expect, bronze typically is your most cost-effective solution, and gold is, of course, your most expensive. But it very much depends on what the customer's ambitions is, what their key drivers effectively, as to where they're going to sit on that kind of spectrum of options. But by setting out those various options, each with a possible payback with some budget costs, it really helps the customer understand exactly where they want to take their estate. And of course, with paybacks and savings, that is the kind of first stage of starting to build the business case. Moving from that point onwards, we then end up in the technical design phase. So we're then designing the building, setting out the cost plan, identifying the programme of works, and of course at an estate-wide level that can be quite a significant piece of work. And then very quickly from that point onwards, we're moving into project delivery. So the electrification of the assets, really kind of an integrated solution where we're not just packaging up one product, we're actually looking at the estate and the building and incorporating multiple elements of improvement and progress towards net zero. So typically electrification of buildings, installation of EV charging, deployment of renewables, and of course kind of fabric improvements. And where possible, of course, focusing on embedded carbon, we are deploying our offsite manufacturing capability, and that of course has many benefits in terms of waste reduction. Once we've delivered the project, then of course it's great because we can then move into the aftercare product, which is where we're really making sure that building delivers everything it promised during the design phase. As we know, these technically advanced buildings require closer attention to ensure they're controlled and operate correctly. And with the new introduction of the neighbours standard that's come in, we're seeing a lot of focus on the FM providers to ensure that they're set up and ready to operate the building correctly. I'll talk a little bit more about neighbours later on. We're also finding in that kind of aftercare phase that it's really important that there is a maintenance scheme that's ready and supportive of this new technology in the new building. And in the case of NG Bailey, we offer digital maintenance, which is moving away from the traditional SFG 20 standardized maintenance regimes and putting in place a maintenance regime that's appropriate for this new technology data-led environment we're now working in. And of course, at that point, we can recertify the building from an EPC perspective and tick that box in terms of hitting that target. Of course, once that aftercare service is complete, we're then into the position of kind of validating their success. And I think, as I know it's going to be talked about throughout this event, there are links now to asset value in terms of net zero for the built environment. So we're seeing, and certainly our customers are telling us, that there are potential improvements in asset value of upwards of 20% by having a building that's fit for the future and delivering at the net zero levels. We're also hearing that for every EPC grade improvement, there is a potential 4.5% lease value increase. And coupled with those two benefits, with reduction in energy consumption and a reduction in carbon emissions, really this kind of end-to-end pathway has many, many benefits and works well for our customers. So that pathway really is key and fundamental to our offering in the marketplace. And as I've mentioned at the beginning, it works really well at a building level, but it's very much scalable up to an estate level as well. So just moving into some of the lessons we've learned and the challenges. The first one, and it was the first step on the process previously, which is data really is key. Understanding your assets before you walk into a plan really does make the planning phase for a transition to net zero much, much easier. Typically it's forgotten about or it's not seen as very important, but we've had massive success in ensuring our customers capture that asset data up front. They have a clear understanding of the assets, their age, their condition, the fabric, and of course their energy across their portfolios or buildings. That really does make the whole process much easier. So for us, a lesson learned over many, many years, but we would state that it really is number one in terms of our lessons learned. Moving on, again, one that we've learned working with a number of customers over the last 2 to 3 years, really, which is ensuring that there are clear metrics for how we're going to judge the business case and the success of a project. Of course, we're now moving to a world where paybacks just from energy reduction aren't quite enough. So if you're looking for kind of 1 to 2 year paybacks by electrifying your building, the reality is they're just not there. So that means that we need to look at net zero transition with a number of different metrics. They might be asset value, as we previously talked about. We've potentially looked at things like lease values, again, as previously mentioned. Of course, there are potential energy improvements, but then it's about understanding what the cost of carbon is to the business. And that of course, is from a reputation perspective, from a corporate ESP perspective, what is it? And how much do you value the transition to net zero? What does it mean to that organization? And we just really ask our customers to give that some deep thought before we go into the program and following the pathway we previously discussed. Just make sure as you kind of get through the selection of which options you want to take forward for your building, you really have an understanding of what's going to make the business case stack up for your organisation. Moving on beyond that, a technical lesson we've learned is that fabric is not always first. I think it's kind of the fabric first approach has kind of been coined and associated with net zero over the last 2 years. We found that not always to be the case, and it's not quite a carte blanche, works in every scenario statement. But for us, fabric is not always first. Making sure we've got the right HVAC technology installed, that really is the first piece for us, working out what's suitable. And then it really, as we model each of our kind of concept solutions, dropping in various fabric options to understand which ones are viable and which ones really offer a best fit solution works for us. And in many cases, it's one or two fabric upgrades that we find delivers the best overall solution rather than a complete comprehensive upgrade of the fabric. Albeit every building is different, so we do need to take a bespoke view for each of our environments. Moving on, renewable technology is still absolutely key. There is nothing better in terms of improving our energy intensity than solar PV. It's still one of the greatest tools for us in terms of improving our building performance. And we work with our customers to really challenge how else we can deploy PV, because I think sometimes it's disregarded because there isn't much roof space. But we do challenge customers to really think beyond whether or not there might be some land adjacent to your building that you could utilise, or various other options for deploying it. But in terms of that real reduction of energy intensity, there is still nothing better than solar PV. I mentioned neighbours earlier in terms of our pathway, and neighbours really is fundamental to this as we see it, and we're seeing more and more neighbours accreditations be put forward in the tenders we're working with. Now, getting neighbours right is a real challenge. It's very technical. It requires a lot of control, a lot of process, and a lot of effort. And our suggestion is that getting the alignment with the FM provider on site is really the key to success. The FM providers are the ones that are stood in front of the assets, have control of the assets, are operating the BMS control system, and ultimately getting that organisation on board really is one of the keys to success. And we've had some great results today. We're finding the process of operating neighbours being built into our FM contracts is actually really helping us understand the building performance, and also it's proving a great measure of our success in terms of maintaining the assets as well. So yeah, neighbours is right up there in terms of a potential challenge, but also a great opportunity. And then just lastly, in terms of this section, I guess ultimately it's the rate of change. And that is really that we're just not still seeing the rate of change required. There are so many buildings out there. I think they say 80% of the buildings that are constructed today are still going to be with us by 2050. And of course, the amount of transition, the amount of change, is absolutely staggering. And whilst we are really kind of encouraged by working with a number of customers that are really behind their ESG targets, and they are making positive change, we're perhaps still not seeing it across the board. And one thing we are really passionate about is just ensuring that every customer that we work with gets an opportunity to understand what NG Bailey do in net zero and has the opportunity to work with us at some point in the future. So just moving briefly on to what do we see beyond 2023, I guess a few simple bits here. The first thing is grid capacity. So unlike the past, we weren't looking at buildings and giving great consideration to their network capacity. But certainly in certain sectors that we work, where EV is becoming a really big part of the installation of new builds and retrofits, that grid capacity, the available capacity on the grid, is absolutely vital. So making sure that is one of the early considerations as we get into the kind of concept and design phase is really key for us. And we think that'll be more important moving forward. Neighbours, of course, as I mentioned previously, is gaining traction. we are seeing more and more of that of all of the projects that we effectively work on. In fact, not just in construction, but also on the FM side. So, yeah, we're fully behind Neighbours. We think it's a great opportunity for the industry, and it's going to really help us deliver the promise of some of these new buildings that are coming online. I guess one area of technical focus that we are working on at the moment is around the increase of demand for embedded carbon data. And this is not just for kind of new build projects, but we're also seeing it on our kind of small works teams as well. An expectation that actually we provide comprehensive embedded carbon data for the projects that we're delivering. And of course, that's a real challenge for us because there's not a great deal of MEP data out there in the industry. So we're working hard with suppliers to start to build processes by which that data will come through to us naturally, but it is a long journey and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. But one thing we're really hoping to see beyond 2023 is perhaps some more collaboration across the industry in terms of sharing embedded carbon data. And I'm sure we will see more of that in the future. And then just lastly, new procurement routes are starting to open up. Of course, there are a raft of frameworks currently. There's a lot of funding in the market for new sectors, the decarbonisation fund, for example. And we are starting to see new procurement routes open up to us, specifically in terms of working directly with customers, where they have immediate targets to meet, some real challenges to climb, and they're looking to contractors like us, experts, to support them. We really welcome that because, of course, it gives us an opportunity to bring the entire might of NG Bailey down into help supporting the customer challenges. So that's what we think the future looks like, and that is the end of my section. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much for that. Really interesting stuff. As we wait for audience questions to come, and I've got a quick, interesting one, one that I'm interested in. I don't know how interesting it is to anybody else, but in terms, it was interesting what you were talking about in terms of estate work, and I just wondered whether you could sort of say what the state of the market was in terms of clients looking at, their entire estate, and are there efficiencies to be had there from looking at doing that rather than buildings individually and creating contracts for those wider estates?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I think the challenge is pretty vast in terms of tackling an estate. Certainly, the customers we're working with have really started to put effort into what it looks like on a statewide level. It does require kind of a different level of detail and data, I suppose. So at a statewide level, you can use quite high level data to kind of build your roadmap. It's still pretty complicated, but you don't need to kind of go down to an asset level. And that's, of course, your kind of stage one, really. So what does your trajectory look like? What does your implementation plan look like? Which buildings should you prioritize? And then, of course, once you've got that high level plan, then kind of getting down to the detail and building it really out asset by asset. I think obviously there's been some pretty ambitious ESG targets set in the last kind of 3 to 5 years. I guess now they're really starting to motor in terms of kind of planning for that change. And of course, in terms of procurement, I think we are engaged with quite a few customers now in terms of very, very small frameworks for delivery of projects across portfolios, which is not something we've had a huge amount of experience of in the past, but it is brilliant for us because where we're working on a maintenance contract with a customer, we have our teams on the ground, and a lot of this retrofit work really swings in the balance where you've got customers inside the building. So our maintenance teams are pivotal because they can, of course, bridge the gap in communication between our engineering business doing the project delivery, but then also the kind of the end user. So disruptions minimised, which is pivotal. And if we can be really kind of integral to a customer's delivery of an estate change, it means that NG Bailey can invest as well. So we can put more resource, our best teams into that environment because we kind of have a little bit more clarity over the pipeline of work that's coming to us. And I guess as any engineering company would say, the closer we can work with the the end customer, the better that relationship can be, the greater our understanding of their challenges can be, and hopefully the better the solution is.
And is there a degree to which you're educating them? I mean, how easy is it for them to operate a system once it's installed? Do you have a role then in terms of their efficient operation of the system?
Yeah, in terms of education, I think some customers are really far ahead, and they're kind of driving us, and we're trying to keep up. That's probably a fairly small subset of the market. Probably the majority of other kind of landlords, property owners, they have a lot of other priorities to be dealing with. So we're really trying to help kind of educate them as best we possibly can and take them through the process. Yeah, I mean, every estate's different. Some estates are already really complicated, and actually, what you find is some of these buildings that are net zero ready are actually a lot easier than the buildings they've already kind of got in their estates. Simplified HVAC equipment. So from a technical perspective, perhaps easier to maintain, albeit the caveat to that is, of course, neighbours and the close control of asset performance and set points and operation. That does add a new dynamic to things. And of course, we're supporting customers with that. So, yeah, it's different. I guess one thing we are seeing is perhaps certainly in some environments, some sectors, where traditionally maintenance might be delivered by in-house teams, where you've got very traditional kind of HVAC systems. Just a slight move to more outsourcing of that to bring specialists in to enable them to maintain that equipment. So yeah, it's ever changing.
Really interesting, yeah. Got one here from the audience. David says, how important is timing of retrofit to change assets that are near the end of their life anyway, i.e. don't retrofit assets until they're worn out?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Again, at a statewide level, when you're building your implementation plan, there's a couple of things to consider, aren't there? Which buildings are the most important to convert from the carbon saving perspective, but also, I guess sweating some assets as long as you can until they're at the end of their life cycle anyway. And then, of course, the business case just is so much more robust, isn't it? So you're looking at a payback, of course, which is great for an energy saving. You're looking at a carbon reduction, of course. You're looking at your kind of reputational risk to meet your ESG targets. But then if the assets are, beyond their lifespan already, or very, very close to the end of it, then the business case is much more stronger. And when you're talking to FDs and CEOs about business cases, the stronger it is, the more likely, of course, you've got in terms of success. So that's really why the asset data piece for us is so pivotal at the front end. Yes, of course, you can have a plan, but actually just understanding which assets are due for replacement, first and foremost, I think is really key.
Great. Another question I had was on skills. Obviously, some of this stuff, this tech is quite new. What are you doing in terms of equipping your workforce to be able to install this stuff?
Hunting down specialists, I guess, is the first thing. So in terms of subject matter experts and things like embodied carbon design, of course, those kind of skills are pivotal. But I guess on the whole, this is about kind of incremental change. So we're not really doing things massively differently. I mean, we're still installing mechanical electrical systems. We just have a slight bias towards a type of technology. So we're supporting our teams in terms of training. There's a lot of CPD going on with suppliers in terms of specific types of equipment. So that's kind of cool and quite exciting. But also, I guess we do have this new branch of work required in terms of building aftercare. So this close control of buildings, making sure we understand the control systems. I mean, we're quite lucky that we've been doing digital maintenance and energy management in our business for about a decade now. So we're pretty well versed. But even still, this piece around aftercare and neighbours is taking it to the next level.
Great, really interesting. Yeah, whole new economy growing now. So thanks very much for joining us today to explain that sector that's only going to get bigger and bigger.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me. Thank you.